To truth revealed with champagne, Imarania declared, her voice steady as she raised her glass, eyes locked on the crowd, knowing the poison meant for her now swirled in Catherine Ellis's flute. Welcome, listeners. Where are you tuning in from today? Chicago's glittering skyline, a cozy cafe in Paris, or perhaps a quiet corner of London? I'm thrilled you're here for this tale of betrayal and brilliance, and I'd love to hear your guesses. What do you think happens when a wife uncovers a deadly plot at her anniversary? Subscribe to our channel for the latest gripping stories and drop a comment sharing where you're listening from. It fuels our passion to keep these tales coming. What secrets hide in a glass of champagne? How far would you go to protect your truth? Dive into betrayal in the champagne glow, where every sip holds a revelation. The Meridian Hotel's rooftop was a cathedral of light, its chandeliers casting amber prisms across mirrored glassware, each facet catching the pulse of the city below. The air carried the cool kiss of Lake Michigan, laced with bergamot and the faint perfume of pale orchids arranged in sleek crystal vases. A jazz quartet spun soft, sultry notes, their melodies curling like smoke around the laughter of guests in tailored suits and shimmering gowns. At the heart of it stood Imarania, her gold silk dress clinging to her frame like liquid fire, its subtle sheen a quiet rebellion against the night's opulence. At 30, she was a corporate strategist whose mind cut sharper than the skyline, her dark eyes scanning the scene with the precision of a chess master. This was her 18th anniversary with Oliver Grant, the white biotech CEO whose charisma could bend a room to his will, and tonight, the weight of that charm felt heavier than ever. Oliver moved through the crowd like a conductor, his deep voice weaving stories that drew smiles and clinking glasses. His tuxedo was crisp, his dimples a practiced weapon, disarming even the most skeptical board member. Imara watched him, her own smile a carefully crafted mask, as he raised a flute of champagne for a toast. To endurance, he said, his words warm as whiskey. To love that weathers storms, layoffs, parenthood, even that power outage on our first date. Laughter rippled through the guests, enchanted by his easy grace. He winked at Amara, his green eyes catching the candlelight, and for a moment she almost believed the man who'd built their life still meant it. But her gaze drifted to his hand, the subtle flick of his wrist as he tilted a small, glinting vial toward her champagne. The movement was so quick, so practiced, it might have been invisible to anyone not looking for it. Imara was looking. She didn't flinch. Her pulse stayed even, her fingers steady around the stem of her glass. 18 years had taught her to read him, the pause too long, the glance too precise. He thought she'd drink, smile, and sink into the haze he'd planned. Instead, she turned, her gold dress whispering against her skin, and faced Catherine Ellis, the white nurse Oliver had introduced as an old colleague. Catherine stood poised in a sapphire satin gown, its high collar accentuating her elegant neck. Her blonde hair pinned with meticulous care. Her laugh was bright, her voice velvet, but her jasmine perfume clawed at the air, syrupy and overripe. She'd greeted Imara earlier with a hug that lingered a fraction too long, her touch too familiar for a stranger. Now she stood close to Oliver, her shoulder brushing his as if it belonged there. Careful, Catherine, Imara said, her tone light, teasing, as she lifted her champagne flute. I think you grabbed mine by mistake. I'm picky about my glass. She extended her own flute, the one Oliver had spiked, her smile as delicate as the bubbles rising within. Catherine's eyes flickered with amusement, oblivious to the danger. Am I in trouble already? She teased back, her voice a please assistant. A soft chime, and took the glass without hesitation. Their fingers brushed as the flutes exchanged hands, and Imara's heart thudded, though her face betrayed nothing. Catherine raised the glass, sipped deeply and smiled, her lips glistening with champagne. To happy accidents, she said, toasting Imara. Oliver's gaze lingered on Catherine, his jaw tightening imperceptibly. Imara sipped from Catherine's untouched glass, the peach and fizz sharp on her tongue. Clean, safe. She set the flute down, her eyes meeting Oliver's for a fleeting moment. He looked away, but not before she saw the calculation in his stare, The rooftop shimmered with curated perfection. Fairy lights strung like stars, waiters gliding with trays of rosemary lamb and crystal flutes, the lake's soft ripples glinting in the distance. Guests clustered around high tables, their laughter mingling with the clink of forks and the quartet's low, mournful saxophone. Imara stood at the edge of the scene, her gold dress catching the breeze, her presence a quiet command. She was no stranger to attention. Her career had taught her to wield it like a blade. But tonight, it was Oliver who held the spotlight, his charm a currency that bought trust and admiration. He leaned toward a board member, his hand gesturing animatedly, his laughter drawing heads. Imara watched, her mind replaying that vial, the glint of intent. She'd seen it, clear as the crystal in her hand, and yet the crowd saw only the man they called Oliver the gentleman. Catherine drifted closer to him, her sapphire dress catching the light as she laughed at something he said, her hand grazing his sleeve. Imara's stomach tightened, not with jealousy but with clarity. The woman's ease, the way Oliver's eyes followed her, the private tilt of their heads. It was a language she'd refused to read until now. She sipped her champagne, the bubbles sharp and cold, and let her gaze sweep the room. Colleagues, friends, distant relatives flown in for the occasion. None of them saw the fracture beneath the golden facade. Not yet. Imara's smile held as she moved through the crowd, her steps deliberate, her presence a quiet storm. She stopped beside a table of orchids, their petals pale as moonlight, and let her fingers brush one. Fragile, beautiful, temporary, like trust. Oliver's voice rose again. Another story, another laugh. He was magnetic, undeniable, the kind of man who could sell dreams to the waking. Imara had once been one of them, 18 years ago when his promises felt like truth. Now she saw the seams of his performance, the careful stitches of a lie. Catherine's laughter floated over. Too bright, too close. Imara's eyes followed her, noting the way she leaned into Oliver, the way his hand brushed a non-existent crumb from her wrist. The gesture was small, intimate, a secret hidden in plain sight. Imara's grip on her glass tightened, but her face remained a portrait of calm. She'd learned to play the game too, better than he knew. As the quartet shifted to a slower tune, Imara felt the weight of the moment settle. The vial, the swap, the untouched glass in her hand. It was the opening move in a game Oliver didn't know he was playing. She glanced at Catherine, now sipping the spiked champagne, her smile radiant, unaware. Imara's heart beat a steady rhythm, not of fear but of focus. The night was young, the stage set, and every detail, every glance, every gesture was a thread in the tapestry she was weaving. She raised her glass to her lips, the liquid cool and clean, and let her eyes meet Oliver's across the room. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, and in that moment, she knew. He thought he was in control. He was wrong. The glass-walled house on Avalon Bay's hill was a monument to precision, its sleek lines framing sweeping views of the ocean's restless shimmer. Amarania stood at its heart, her bare feet cool against the polished oak floor, the morning light casting her shadow long and sharp. At 30, she was a black corporate strategist whose mind parsed chaos into strategy. Her life with Oliver Grant, a carefully curated rhythm. Their 18-year marriage had built this, a home where every surface gleamed, every routine deliberate. Sunday dim sum at Jade Harbor, the clatter of chopsticks and Zara's giggles over steamed buns. Beach walks at dusk, their daughter's small hands swinging between them. Annual escapes to remote hot springs where the world's noise faded to steam and silence. Zara, 13, was their mirror. Amara's sharpness in her quick wit, Oliver's softness in her wide, trusting eyes. This was the life they'd crafted, a symphony of moments that felt eternal, until it didn't. Imara leaned against the kitchen island, a mug of coffee cooling in her hand, its bitterness mirroring the unease curling in her chest. Oliver's biotech empire had grown from a single idea to a titan of innovation, his charisma the spark that lit boardrooms and secured millions. He was the man who could sell stars to the night sky, his smile a promise, his voice a tether. But lately that tether had frayed. His late nights multiplied, his stories vague, a missed dinner blamed on a client, a weekend trip stretched by unavoidable meetings. Imara had chalked it up to the weight of his empire, the grind of ambition. She'd told herself it was stress, aging, anything but the truth her mind was beginning to whisper. She sipped her coffee, the liquid sharp, and let her eyes drift to the ocean beyond the glass. The waves churned, restless, like the questions she'd buried. The first crack appeared on an ordinary morning, sunlight spilling through the glass walls as Imara unpacked Oliver's gym bag, left unzipped by the entry bench. She expected damp towels, worn sneakers. Instead, her fingers brushed tailored slacks, a silk shirt, polished loafers, no trace of sweat or gym. Her pulse quickened, but her face stayed calm. "Client dinner," Oliver said when she asked, his voice smooth as the marble counter, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "Last-minute thing." She nodded, her smile a practiced veil, but the lie settled like a stone in her gut. He'd never kept a backup outfit in 18 years. Never needed one. She tucked the moment away, a puzzle piece she didn't yet understand, and went about her day. Client calls, Zara's science fair project, the rhythm unbroken, but her mind was already mapping. Another fracture came during a pancake breakfast, the kitchen warm with the scent of blueberries and syrup. Zara, perched on a stool, laughed as Imara flipped a pancake too high, nearly hitting the ceiling. Oliver sat across from them, his phone glowing, his lips curving into a private smile. The screen lit up again, a text flashing briefly before he tilted it away. "Last night was unforgettable. With a red heart, no name." Amara's breath caught, but she kept her spatula steady, her voice light. "Who's that?" she asked, casually pouring orange juice. Oliver laughed, too quickly, too brightly. "Just a colleague, Seth from development. Dramatic guy, bad date." His dimples flashed, disarming, but Amara's strategist's mind logged the lie. Seth didn't send red hearts. No one did. She smiled, handed him a plate, and let the moment pass. But her heart was a metronome, ticking toward truth. Zara's voice broke the silence that night, soft and hesitant as Imara tucked her into bed. "Why's Dad always smiling at his phone?" she whispered, her brown eyes wide, searching. Amara's chest tightened, a mother's instinct to shield warring with the strategist's need to know. She kissed Zara's forehead, her lips lingering. "He's just busy, sweetheart," she said, the words tasting like ash. She smoothed the blanket, turned off the lamp, and closed the door. But Zara's question echoed, a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Imara stood in the hallway, the glass walls reflecting her silhouette, and felt the life she'd built shift beneath her. Oliver was downstairs, his phone buzzing again, his laughter low and private. She didn't call out. Instead, she began to watch, to measure, to collect. The rhythm of their life, dim sum, beach walks, hot spring escapes, had once felt like love's heartbeat. Now it felt like a script, each moment staged to distract. Oliver's touches, once warm and certain, were offbeat, his hands brushing past her with a stranger's distance. Imara stood at the edge of their bedroom, watching him sleep, his chest rising and falling under the moonlight, streaming through the glass. He was still the man who'd built an empire, who'd built them. But the man she'd trusted was slipping away, replaced by someone who locked his briefcase, who smiled at his screen, who left the room when his phone rang. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She sharpened. Imara moved through their home, her steps silent, her mind a ledger. The glass walls, once a symbol of transparency, now felt like a stage. Every gesture watched, every word weighed. She poured another coffee, the mug cold in her hands, and stood by the window. The ocean's churn a mirror to her thoughts. Oliver's empire had taught him to hide, to build facades as strong as his biotech labs. But Imara was no stranger to strategy. She'd built her career on seeing what others missed, on turning chaos into clarity. Now she turned that lens on her own life, on the man who'd promised forever. The gym bag, the text, Zara's question. They weren't accidents. They were signals, and Imara was listening. As she set the mug down, the clink against the counter was sharp, final. She looked at the glass walls, their reflections holding her steady gaze. This life, This curated perfection was hers too. She'd helped build it, piece by deliberate piece. But if Oliver thought he could unravel it without her noticing, he'd underestimated her. Nia was no one's pawn. She was the strategist, the one who saw the board before the game began. And as she stood there, the ocean whispering beyond the glass, she knew, whatever he was hiding, she'd find it. Not for revenge, but for truth. For Zara. For herself. The air in the glass-walled house carried a faint chill, as if the ocean beyond Avalon Bay had slipped through the seams of Nia's carefully ordered world. She stood at her office desk, her fingers tracing the edge of a leather-bound planner, her dark eyes sharp with focus. At 30, Imara was a black corporate strategist whose mind could unravel the knottiest of corporate puzzles. But now her gaze turned inward, dissecting the life she'd built with Oliver Grant. The rhythm of their 18-year marriage, Sunday dim sum, beach walks, Zara's laughter, had once felt like a heartbeat. Now it was a pulse she could no longer trust. Suspicion had taken root, a quiet seed sprouting in the cracks of Oliver's polished facade. And Imara was no longer the wife who looked away. She was the hunter, tracking truth through the shadows of his lies. It began with a name, dropped so casually it felt like a blade disguised as a feather. Oliver sat at the kitchen island, slicing an apple with precise flicks of a paring knife, his white shirt crisp despite the late hour. "Catherine Ellis," he said, answering Imara's question about the anniversary dinner's guest list. "Old co-worker from the early days, reconnected on LinkedIn." His voice was smooth, his dimples a practiced charm, but Imara's pulse quickened. She leaned against the counter, her coffee mug a prop to mask the tightening in her chest. "You never mentioned her," she said, her tone light, probing, like a strategist testing a rival's defense. He shrugged, his eyes on the apple. "She moved out of state years ago, before we got serious." The words landed too neatly, rehearsed, and Imara's mind logged them, a red flag unfurling in the quiet. Days later, the second seed sprouted. Imara was reviewing the anniversary menu with Oliver, the kitchen bathed in morning light, the scent of coffee mingling with the tang of citrus. He mentioned a lavender dessert, a suggestion he attributed to the caterer. Imara stirred her tea, her spoon clinking softly. "Who suggested it?" she asked, her voice casual, her eyes on his face. "Just the caterer," he said, not looking up, his fingers flipping through a tablet. That night, while clearing dishes, Imara glimpsed his planner, left open on the counter. A single line, in his unmistakable scrawl. "Catherine loves lavender." Not the caterer. The name was worn smooth, familiar, like a stone polished by frequent touch. Imara's breath caught, but she didn't react. She closed the planner, her fingers steady, and added the note to her mental ledger. The third seed was planted at Oliver's office, a sleek tower of glass and steel where his biotech empire thrived. Imara arrived unannounced, a manila envelope of forgotten contracts in hand, her heels clicking against the marble lobby. She'd meant to surprise him, to bridge the growing distance with a small gesture. But his assistant, a young woman with a nervous smile, blinked in surprise. "Mr. Grant's working from home today," she said, her voice faltering. Imara's smile didn't waver, but her mind raced. She'd kissed him goodbye that morning as he left for the office, his briefcase in hand, his tie perfectly knotted. "Guess I mixed up his schedule," she said, her tone bright. But inside, the pieces were aligning. She drove home, the envelope untouched, and felt the weight of his absence settle like dust. He wasn't at home. He wasn't at work. Where was he? The final blow came quietly, a digital whisper in the glow of Oliver's phone. Imara was tidying the living room, the glass walls reflecting the setting sun, when his phone buzzed on the coffee table. She glanced at it, not intending to pry, but the screen lit up with a notification. "Meeting reminder, KE at Harbor Point." No context, no explanation, just initials that burned into her mind. She didn't touch the phone, but her heart pounded, a drumbeat of certainty. When Oliver returned that evening, his hair slightly mussed, his jacket smelling faintly of clove and vanilla, not his cologne, Imara greeted him with a smile. "Long day?" she asked, handing him a glass of water. Yeah, vendor meeting ran late, he said, his eyes sliding past hers. She nodded, but her mind was a vault, locking away the lie. Amara began to watch him, her strategist's eye dissecting every gesture. The way he locked his briefcase, a new habit, the click of the latch sharp in the quiet house. The way he left the room when his phone buzzed, his voice low, his laughter private. The way his stories shifted, meetings with clients who didn't exist, trips with vague itineraries. She didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, she moved through their life with precision, playing the role of the supportive wife while her mind built a case. She noticed his phone passcode had changed, a detail he dismissed as company policy, cybersecurity thing. His tone was clipped, final, as if daring her to question it. She didn't. She smiled, poured him coffee, and let him think she believed. Zara's voice cut through the fog one evening as Imara tucked her into bed. The room was soft with lamplight. Zara's braids fanned across the pillow. "Mom," she whispered, her brown eyes wide. "Why's Dad always smiling at his phone?" The question was a knife, slicing through Imara's carefully constructed calm. She wanted to tell Zara the truth, that the man who read her bedtime stories was building a shadow life, that his smiles belonged to someone else. Instead, she kissed her daughter's forehead, her lips lingering. "He's just busy, sweetheart," she said, her voice steady, her heart fracturing. She turned off the lamp, closed the door, and stood in the hallway, the glass walls cold against her skin. Zara's question echoed, a seed of doubt that rooted deep. Imara returned to the living room, where Oliver sat, his phone glowing, his fingers typing rapidly. She watched him from the doorway, her silhouette a ghost in the glass. He didn't look up. The man who'd once been her safe harbor, who'd promised forever under a starlit sky, was slipping away, replaced by a stranger who hid behind charm and locked briefcases. Amara's hands clenched, then relaxed. She wasn't the woman who'd crumble. She was the strategist who saw patterns, who turned chaos into clarity. The name Catherine Ellis, the lavender note, the office lie, the phone secrets. They weren't random. They were a map, and Imara was tracing it. She turned away, her steps silent, and felt the seeds of doubt take root, not in fear, but in resolve. Whatever Oliver was hiding, she'd find it. Not for anger, but for truth. For Zara, for herself. The glass-walled house on Avalon Bay stood silent, its sleek surfaces reflecting the dim glow of a single lamp. Imarania sat at her office desk, the world beyond the windows swallowed by night, the ocean's murmur a distant pulse. At 30, her strategist's mind was a blade, honed by years of untangling corporate chaos. But now it sliced through the life she'd built with Oliver Grant. The seeds of doubt, his late nights, the gym bag, Catherine Ellis's name, had sprouted into certainty, and Imara was no longer the wife who waited. She was a hunter, stalking the truth through the shadows of her husband's lies, each discovery a thread pulling their curated life apart. Tonight, the final pieces fell into place, and the weight of betrayal settled like a storm about to break. It began with an email, left open on Oliver's laptop, a careless slip in his otherwise meticulous facade. Imara had been tidying the kitchen, the scent of lemon cleaner sharp in the air, when she noticed the screen glowing on the island. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the trackpad, but the strategist in her didn't pause for long. A single click revealed a message from a pharmacy she didn't recognize. The subject line stark, dosage instructions. Her breath caught as she read, 2.5 ml per drink, causes disorientation, confusion, undetectable in standard panels. The order was linked to Catherine Ellis, time-stamped for a day Oliver had claimed he was scouting venues for their anniversary dinner. Imara's pulse thrummed, but her hands stayed steady, her eyes scanning every word. This wasn't a mistake. It was a plan, and she was its target. She clicked again, her heart a metronome of dread and focus. Another email, buried in a folder labeled MISC, held a PDF, a spa retreat itinerary for two, Oliver Grant and Catherine Ellis, booked for a weekend he'd said was a Seattle conference. The dates aligned, the lie crystallized. Imara's fingers moved with quiet efficiency, copying the file to a USB she kept for tax documents. Her hands trembled, not with fear but with the weight of clarity. She closed the laptop, the click sharp in the silent house, and stood still, the glass walls reflecting her silhouette like a sentinel. Oliver's empire had taught him to hide, but Imara was better at finding. She wasn't just uncovering an affair. She was unraveling a betrayal that reached deeper, darker. The final blow came days later. Another accident in Oliver's growing carelessness. His laptop, left open again, held a screenshot of a text conversation, saved as an image, likely exported from a secure app. Imara's breath stopped as she read, "She'll be out by dessert, Oliver. Keep her distracted." His reply, "It won't hurt her, right?" Catherine's response, "Just slows her down. Then we talk options." The word options burned into her mind, each syllable a question: custody, finances, or something worse. Imara thought of her life insurance policy, a seven-figure sum with Oliver as beneficiary, a detail he'd never questioned. Her skin prickled, the air in the house suddenly too thick. She snapped the laptop shut, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out the ocean's hum. This wasn't love gone astray. It was a blueprint for her absence. Imara stood at the window, the glass cold against her palm, and let the truth settle. Oliver wasn't just cheating, he was plotting. Catherine wasn't just a fling. She was a partner in something calculated, something that required Imara to be slowed down. The pharmacy order, the retreat, the texts, they were pieces of a machine, and Imara was meant to be its casualty. Her mind raced, not with panic, but with precision. She saw the board now, every move laid bare. Oliver thought her trusting, pliable, the wife who'd smile through his charm. He didn't know she'd been watching, measuring, building a case since the first lie. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She sharpened. With the efficiency of a strategist facing a hostile takeover, Imara began to act. She backed up the emails, the itinerary, the text screenshot, and the pharmacy order onto two USBs, one for her clutch, the other to be hidden later. She tested an old phone, setting up a camera app to record discreetly, its lens angled perfectly inside her purse. She contacted a lawyer, her voice calm as she outlined just enough suspicious documents, a need for protection. If she didn't check in by midnight on the anniversary, joint assets would freeze, a safeguard against Oliver's plans. She encrypted the files, storing copies in three places: a private office drive, an auto-send to her lawyer, and the USBs. Each step was deliberate, her hands steady, her mind a fortress. Imara moved through the house, her steps silent, the glass walls reflecting a woman transformed. She rehearsed her role for the anniversary dinner, every smile, every laugh calibrated to mask the storm within. She stood before the mirror, her dark eyes meeting their reflection, and whispered, "You won't win." The words were a vow, not to Oliver, but to herself, to Zara, to the life she'd built. Grief had no place here. Focus did. She wasn't plotting revenge. She was crafting survival, a strategy to outmaneuver the man who'd underestimated her. The ocean churned beyond the glass, its rhythm a mirror to her resolve. Oliver thought he held the narrative, that his charm would blind her. He didn't know Imara Nia was no one's pawn. She was the strategist, and the game was hers to win. The glass-walled house on Avalon Bay was a silent witness, its sleek surfaces reflecting the flicker of a single candle as Imara Nia stood in her office, the night pressing against the windows. At 30, her strategist's mind was a crucible, forging resolve from the ashes of betrayal. The truth had unraveled. Oliver Grant's plan, Catherine Ellis's complicity, the sedative meant to blur her senses. But Imara was no longer the wife who trusted. She was a tactician, her heart a steady drumbeat, her hands steady as she crafted a counterplan to outmaneuver the man who'd built their life only to plot his collapse. The anniversary dinner loomed, a stage set for Oliver's betrayal, but Imara was rewriting the script. Every move was calculated, every detail a weapon. She wasn't seeking revenge, she was ensuring survival, for herself and for Zara, her 13-year-old daughter, whose innocence was the stake. Imara would not lose. Imara sat at her desk, the glow of her laptop casting sharp shadows across her face. Her fingers moved with the precision of a chess master, copying the damning evidence, emails, the spa retreat itinerary, the pharmacy order, the text screenshot, onto 2 USB drives. One would stay in her clutch, a sleek black purse she'd chosen for its discreet pocket. The other she'd hide where no one would look, a safeguard against Oliver's charm and Catherine's complicity. She opened an old phone, its screen cracked but functional, and installed a camera app, testing its angle inside her purse. The lens, barely visible, would capture Oliver's hand if it reached for her glass again, a silent witness to his intent. She adjusted the settings, her breath even, her focus absolute. The phone's battery was charged, its memory cleared for one purpose: to record the truth. She stood moving to the living room, where the glass walls mirrored her silhouette against the ocean's dark churn. Amara rehearsed her role for the anniversary dinner, her smile a practiced veil, her laugh a calibrated note. She stood before the mirror, her dark eyes meeting their reflection, and whispered, "You won't win." The words were a vow, not to Oliver but to herself, to Zara, to the life she'd fought for. She imagined the Meridian Hotel's rooftop, its chandeliers and fairy lights, the clink of champagne flutes, Oliver's dimpled smile as he offered her a poisoned glass. She'd swap it with Catherine's, her movements fluid, her face betraying nothing. The plan was simple but ironclad, a checkmate Oliver wouldn't see coming. Imara contacted her lawyer, a woman named Rachel Cole, whose voice was calm but steely over the phone. Imara didn't share everything, just enough: suspicious documents, a need for protection. "If I don't check in by midnight after the dinner," she said, her tone steady, "freeze our joint assets, emergency motion." Rachel didn't ask questions. She understood the weight of Imara's words. The agreement was sealed, a safety net against Oliver's plans. Imara encrypted the evidence, storing copies in 3 places: a private drive in her office, an auto-send email to Rachel set for 10:15 p.m., and the USBs. The second USB would be hidden at the venue, a fail-safe she'd place herself. She tested the encryption, her fingers flying across the keyboard, each click a step toward control. The next day, Imara visited the Meridian Hotel under the guise of checking the event setup. The rooftop was still, its tables bare, the lake's breeze carrying a faint tang of salt. She met the event coordinator, her smile warm, her questions routine. Table placements, playlist details. When the coordinator stepped away, Imara slipped behind the DJ booth, her movements swift and silent. She unscrewed the speaker console's back panel, her fingers steady despite the pulse in her throat, and taped the second USB deep inside, behind the volume regulator. The tape held firm, invisible to anyone not looking. She stood, adjusted her blazer, and walked out, her heels clicking softly, her face a mask of calm. The USB was her insurance, a hidden dagger in the heart of Oliver's stage. Back home, Imara moved through the house with purpose, her gold dress for the dinner laid out on the bed, its satin shimmering like a challenge. She tested her purse's camera again, angling it to catch the glint of a vial, the tilt of a hand. She rehearsed her lines, her gestures, her laugh, standing before the bedroom mirror. "Oh, Catherine, you grabbed my glass," she practiced, her voice light, her smile disarming. Every detail was vetted, every scenario mapped. If Oliver tried to drug her, she'd have the video. If he didn't, the USBs held enough to unravel his world. She wasn't just preparing to catch him, she was preparing to survive him. The glass walls reflected her resolve, their transparency a cruel irony. Oliver thought he controlled the narrative, that his charm would blind her, that Catherine's elegance would distract her. He didn't know Imara had seen through him, that her strategist's mind had turned his lies into a map. She thought of Zara, asleep in her room, her braids fanned across the pillow, her question about Oliver's phone still echoing. Imara's heart tightened, but she didn't falter. This was for her daughter, for the life they'd built, for the woman she'd become. She stood at the window, the ocean's churn a mirror to her resolve, and felt the weight of the counterplan settle. Oliver thought the dinner would be his triumph. He was wrong. Imara Nia was no one's pawn. She was the architect of her salvation. The Meridian Hotel's rooftop was a constellation of light, its fairy lights twinkling like stars against the velvet dusk. The city skyline a jagged crown beyond. The air hummed with the scent of orchids and Lake Michigan's cool breath. The jazz quartet's notes weaving a sultry tapestry through the chatter of guests. Imaranea stood at the center of it, her gold satin dress a quiet flame, its fitted waist and flared hem a study in understated power. At 30, her strategist's mind was a blade, honed and hidden beneath a smile that disarmed. Tonight was her 18th anniversary with Oliver Grant, the white biotech CEO whose charisma held the room like a spell. But Imara knew the truth behind his dimpled grin, and her counterplan was in motion, a performance to unravel his betrayal before it could claim her. Every step, every glance was choreographed. She was no longer the wife, she was the director, and the stage was set. Guests filled the rooftop, their laughter mingling with the clink of champagne flutes. Board members in tailored suits, old friends from Oliver's med school days, distant relatives radiant with expectation. Imara moved through them, her presence a quiet command, her dark eyes scanning the crowd with the precision of a chess master. Her clutch, tucked under her arm, held the old phone, its camera angled to capture Oliver's every move. The USB hidden in the speaker console waited like a coiled spring. She'd rehearsed this moment in the mirror, her smile calibrated, her laugh a perfect note. Oliver approached, his tuxedo crisp, his green eyes catching the candlelight as he leaned in to kiss her cheek. "You look incredible," he murmured, his voice warm as whiskey. "So do you," Imara replied, her smile silk over steel. He handed her a champagne flute, its bubbles tight and eager. She didn't sip. Catherine Ellis arrived, her sapphire gown shimmering, her blonde hair pinned with meticulous grace. Her jasmine perfume hit Imara like a wave, syrupy and sharp, a scent that clung like a warning. Catherine's laugh was too bright, her hug too familiar, as she greeted Imara like an old friend. "So glad you could make it," Imara said, her tone smooth, her eyes locking onto Catherine's. The nurse's smile was polished, but Imara saw the flicker of confidence, the ease of someone who thought they held the upper hand. Catherine drifted toward Oliver, her shoulder brushing his, their laughter a private melody that grated against Imara's nerves. She watched them, her face serene, her pulse steady. The game was on, and she was 3 moves ahead. At 7, the speeches began, the quartet fading to a soft hum. Oliver stood, his presence magnetic, his voice weaving stories of their life. First dates, Zara's birth, beach trips under starlit skies. He spoke of loyalty, his words a velvet lie, his eyes avoiding Imara's as he raised his glass. The crowd toasted, enchanted, but Imara's gaze followed his hand, the subtle hover near his jacket pocket. He moved closer, offering her a new flute, its stem thinner, its rim cold. "This one's chilled, your favorite," he murmured, his smile a practiced mask. Imara took it, her fingers lingering, then turned to Catherine with a playful tilt of her head. "Oh, I think you grabbed mine by mistake," she said, her voice light, teasing. "I'm picky about my glass." Catherine laughed, unbothered, and swapped flutes without a glance, her sapphire gown catching the light as she raised the tainted glass. "To happy accidents," she toasted, sipping deeply, her lips glistening. Imara sipped from Catherine's untouched flute, the peach and fizz clean on her tongue. She set it down, her eyes meeting Oliver's across the table. His gaze lingered on Catherine, not her, his jaw tightening for a fraction of a second. Imara's heart thrummed, not with fear but with focus. The dinner unfolded, platters of rosemary lamb, clinking forks, a slideshow Oliver had compiled, images of their life flickering on a screen. Guests laughed, some teared up, as photos of their first apartment, Zara as a baby, holiday mornings played. Oliver squeezed Imara's hand, his touch a performance, but she felt the distance, the lie beneath his skin. Catherine leaned in, whispering something to him, her lips curled in a private smirk. Imara watched, her face a portrait of calm, her mind a storm of precision. The quartet's music swelled, the rooftop glowing with the soft gold of dusk. Imara stood, her gold dress catching the breeze, and tapped her flute with a fork, the chime cutting through the chatter. Heads turned, Oliver's eyes blinking in surprise. She hadn't planned to speak, not in his script. "I just want to thank everyone," she said, her voice clear, carrying over the lake's whisper. Being here tonight means more than you know. She smiled, her gaze sweeping the crowd, then settling on Oliver. My husband believes in celebration, she continued, her tone warm but edged. He says the best truths come with champagne. Laughter rippled through the tables, but Amara's eyes caught Catherine's hand, trembling slightly on the linen tablecloth. The nurse's smile faltered, her breath stuttering, her fingers clenching the table's edge. Amara's pulse stayed even, her performance flawless. Catherine blinked rapidly, her lips parting without sound, a glitch in her polished grace. Oliver's smile twitched, his eyes flicking to her glass, then to Amara. She held his gaze, her expression serene. But inside, the storm was breaking. The rooftop's air shifted, the fairy lights dimming in the weight of the moment. Catherine coughed, a soft sound at first, then deeper, her hand rising to her chest. Amara didn't move. She stood, her gold dress a beacon, her clutch heavy with the phone recording every second. The performance was hers, and Oliver didn't know the script had changed. The truth was rising, sharp and inevitable, and Amara was its conductor. The Meridian Hotel's rooftop was a stage fracturing under its weight, the fairy lights flickering like dying stars, the jazz quartet's notes faltering into silence. Imara Nia stood at its heart, her gold satin dress a beacon in the chaos, her dark eyes unyielding as the truth she'd orchestrated began to unravel. At 30, the black corporate strategist had turned her husband's betrayal into a trap, and now, as Catherine Ellis's sapphire-clad form swayed, the performance reached its crescendo. The poisoned champagne meant for Imara now coursed through Catherine's veins, her trembling hand clutching the table, her breath a ragged gasp. Oliver Grant, the white biotech CEO whose charm had held the room, knelt beside her, his tuxedo rumpled, his face a mask of panic that betrayed more than concern. Imara's counterplan had ignited, and the reckoning was hers to command. Catherine's cough deepened, a hollow sound that cut through the clink of glasses and murmurs of guests. Her skin paled beneath her foundation, her sapphire gown pooling like spilled ink as she slumped forward. "Julian," she rasped, her voice thin, her hand reaching for him. Oliver caught her, his shout for 911 too loud, too urgent, a performance unraveling at the seams. "Someone call medical now," he barked, but his eyes flicked to Imara, a storm of calculation flickering beneath his fear. The crowd froze, forks suspended, glasses stilled, as gasps rippled through the rooftop. A waiter stumbled, a tray of wine glasses crashing against the marble floor, the shatter sharp and final. Amara stood motionless, her flute untouched on the table, her presence a quiet pillar amid the chaos. Every eye turned to her, sensing the shift, the illusion cracking. She moved with deliberate grace, her heels clicking softly as she crossed to the DJ booth. The technician glanced up, startled. "Just switching the playlist," Imara said, her voice sweet, her smile disarming. He nodded, turning the dial, and the stage screen behind the head table flickered to life. Silence swept the room, thick as the lake's breeze. The first image appeared. Oliver and Catherine in a hotel room, arms entwined, time-stamped for a weekend he'd claimed was a Seattle conference. Gasps erupted, sharp as breaking glass. Then a pharmacy receipt, Catherine's name in the order field, detailing a sedative meant to disorient. Another image, the text screenshot. "She'll be out by dessert, Oliver. Keep her distracted." His reply, "It won't hurt her, right?" The crowd stopped breathing, their eyes wide, their whispers a low hum of disbelief. The final frame held, grainy but unmistakable. A video from Imara's purse camera, Oliver's hand sliding a vial from his jacket, tilting it toward a champagne flute, his smile as casual as a toast. Catherine beside him, laughing, then the glass swap, her fate sealed by her trust. The rooftop was a tableau of shock, board members clutching napkins, friends exchanging horrified glances, relatives frozen in their seats. A chair scraped loudly against the tile, a woman whispering, "Oh my God." Oliver stood, his face pale, his body rigid as the screen burned his lies into the night. His mouth opened, but no words came. His charm, a shattered relic. Imara stepped forward, her voice clear, cutting through the silence. "I believe the police should be here any minute," she said, her tone calm, deliberate. "I've sent copies of everything to my attorney in case anything unfortunate happened to me tonight." Sirens wailed in the distance, blue and red lights washing over the rooftop like a tide of judgment. Oliver's eyes darted, cornered, his hands half raised as if to fend off the inevitable. "This is insane," he spat, his voice shaking, his dimples gone. "She's framing me. Catherine must have had an allergic reaction." But his words were hollow, a desperate script no one believed. Imara met his gaze, her expression serene, her spine straight. "Then why?" she said quietly. "Did you order a sedative under her name?" The question landed like a blade, and Oliver's eyes flickered, just once. But it was enough. The crowd parted as 3 officers and a paramedic team rushed in, the medics kneeling beside Catherine, her breath shallow, her hand limp under an oxygen mask. An officer approached Imara, his voice low, controlled. "Mara, Nia?" She nodded, handing him the USB from her clutch, its weight a quiet triumph. "Everything's on here," she said, her voice steady. Oliver backed away, his hands trembling. "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered. But a second officer moved swiftly, tackling him to the marble floor. The scuffle was brief, chairs overturning, a violinist's bow frozen midair. They cuffed him where he fell, the steel clicking shut, his tuxedo a crumpled costume over something rotten. Catherine was wheeled away on a stretcher, her sapphire gown trailing, her eyes half open, searching for Oliver but finding only air. Imara stood still, her gold dress catching the flickering lights, her presence a quiet storm. The crowd watched, some in awe, others in horror, as the man they toasted was led away, his empire in ruins. Imara's heart beat steadily, her hands unshaking. She didn't cry, didn't shout, didn't collapse. She was the strategist who'd seen the board, who'd played the game, and won. The rooftop was silent now, the fairy lights dim, the truth settling like dust over shattered illusions. Oliver's lies had been her stage, and she'd turned it against him. For Zara, for herself. The Meridian Hotel's rooftop lay quiet, its fairy lights dimmed, the once vibrant glow of champagne flutes and laughter replaced by a hush as heavy as the lake's breeze. Imara Nia stood alone at the edge of the marble floor, her gold satin dress catching the last flickers of candlelight, her dark eyes tracing the city skyline where it met the restless churn of Lake Michigan. At 30, the black corporate strategist had dismantled her husband's betrayal with the precision of a master chess player, turning Oliver Grant's poison plan against him. The screen was dark now, its images, hotel photos, pharmacy receipts, damning texts, etched into the minds of the stunned guests who'd scattered like leaves in a storm. Oliver was gone, cuffed and led away, his biotech empire crumbling. Catherine Ellis was en route to a hospital, her sapphire gown a fading memory. Imara's counterplan had succeeded, but the aftermath was no victory march. It was a reckoning with the life she'd reclaimed. She lifted the last untouched flute of champagne from the table, its bubbles still dancing, and raised it to the sky. The liquid was sharp, clean, a quiet toast to survival. Below, camera flashes popped like distant stars, reporters gathering like moths to the scandal's flame. Imara didn't flinch. Her heart beat steadily, her hands unshaking, as she stood in the wreckage of the evening. The guests, board members, friends, relatives, had parted in silence, their whispers trailing behind them like smoke. Some looked at her with awe, others with horror, a few with something like pity. She didn't care. She'd stopped being the wife Oliver sculpted, elegant, pliable, erasable. She was Imara Nia, her shield, her blade, and she'd carved her truth into the night. Her best friend Rachel pushed through the thinning crowd, her face taut with concern. She wrapped a shawl around Imara's shoulders, its warmth a grounding weight. "Zara's safe," Rachel whispered, her voice a lifeline. "She's downstairs with my husband. She didn't see any of it." Relief crashed over Imara, a wave so strong her knees nearly buckled. Not the betrayal, not the poison, but the fear that Zara might have witnessed her father's fall had been her deepest terror. "She's okay," Imara whispered back, her voice barely audible, her eyes stinging but dry. Rachel nodded, squeezing her hand. She's safe. Imara straightened, the shawl a quiet armor, and turned to face the rooftop one last time. The illusion was gone, the stage bare. An officer approached, younger than the others, his eyes carrying a gravity beyond his years. You handled this better than most trained agents, he said, his voice low, respectful. Imara met his gaze, her expression calm. I had 18 years to prepare, she replied, her words steady, final. He nodded, a faint smile not quite reaching his eyes. Oliver's not talking. Lawyered up already. Imara's lips curved slightly. I expected that. She paused, her voice firm. What happens now? The officer glanced at the stretcher marks where Catherine had been. Formal charges, attempted poisoning, fraud, conspiracy. More if she cooperates. Imara nodded, her certainty unshaken. She will, she said, not bitter, not vengeful, just sure. A woman who survives betrayal doesn't stay silent. She sharpens. The rooftop cleared, the cold air biting at Imara's skin, but she welcomed it, let it sting, let it remind her she was still here. Oliver had taken a plea deal, 5 years, no parole, his empire surrendered, his reputation a ghost. Catherine vanished from Chicago, rumors whispering of Denver or some quiet town far from the headlines. Imara didn't care. Catherine was a name she'd deleted, a file no longer needed. The media feasted. CEO's wife outsmarts poison plot. Anniversary ambush. But Imara stopped reading after the first week. The headlines didn't matter. The truth did. She and Zara left the glass-walled house on the hill, its transparency a cruel irony, and moved to a harborside apartment, its walls warm, its windows framing the water's restless dance. They traded Sunday dim sum for Saturday pancakes, Zara's laughter filling the smaller space with new light. Imara resumed painting, a passion buried since college, her brushstrokes vivid, bold, a reclaiming of the self she'd tucked away. The canvas became her mirror, each color a piece of the woman she'd rediscovered. One night, as she tucked Zara into bed, the apartment soft with lamplight, her daughter looked up, her brown eyes wide. Thank you for staying, Zara whispered, her voice small but heavy. The words broke Imara more than the betrayal, more than the spectacle. She kissed Zara's forehead, her lips lingering, and whispered, always. The moment was a wound and a balm, a reminder of why she'd fought, not for vengeance, but for this, for them. The world didn't stop whispering. Strangers stared in coffee shops, colleagues offered cautious nods, and some reached out to shake her hand. Imara didn't blame them for wondering. Vengeance carries a cost, but silence would have cost her everything. Oliver had tried to erase her from the life they'd built, to dissolve her in a haze of sedatives and lies. He'd forgotten she was never just his wife. She was her witness, her architect. As she stood by the harbor one evening, the water's ripples catching the sunset, Imara felt the weight of survival settle. Not heavy, but sure. She'd stood at the edge of betrayal and didn't blink. For Zara, for herself. The aftermath was no triumph, but it was hers. What a journey through betrayal and triumph in betrayal in the champagne glow. What did you think of Imara's calculated brilliance, or the shattering moment when the truth unfolded? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below sharing your reactions, where you're listening from, or what you'd do in her shoes. Your engagement fuels our storytelling, so please subscribe to our channel for more gripping tales and hit that notification bell to never miss an update. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable rooftop, for letting Imara's story resonate in your hearts. We're grateful for every moment you spend with us, and we can't wait to bring you the next chapter of drama and resilience. Until then, keep seeking truth, and we'll see you in the comments and in our next story.